what I'd like to talk about today is what is happening in the property world from a public perspective side, both from a kind of political point of view, what's happening in the public sector, some of the important things that are happening in Dorset and in Bournemouth and Poole. So just touching on local government reorganisation, parts of government policy, and a bit about what's happening in property development in Bournemouth and Dorset from a kind of a public level. So that's that. So who am I? It's a very existential question. First of all, I'm one of the cabinet members at Bournemouth Borough Council, so I'm one of the elected officials. My responsibilities are quite a lot. All the poisonous things that could possibly go wrong. So I think the leader there obviously doesn't really like me that much. So I'm in charge of local government reorganisation, property development services, inward investment, economic growth and policy implementation. All of them have crazy acronyms as well. So I think when I first took that on and I told a friend of mine that I was in charge of LGR, they said, "Oh good, are you running Gay Pride?" I'm like, no, it's not, that's a different acronym. So that's my council role. I'm also a board member of the Local Government Association. The LGA is basically the voice of local government on a national stage. So they serve a really important lobbying role with national government, policy work as well, and also basically local government is much bigger than national government in many ways. So they are there to feed back what's happening on the ground on a national level. And I'm actually a member of the Economy, Environment, Housing and Transportation Board, and also was a spokesman for the LGA at the Conservative Party conference. So that's that side of things. Obviously the politics, I'm a Conservative, I'm Deputy Chair of Bournemouth West, I do some policy advice for Conservatives as well nationally, and last year I was, they obviously ran out of people, so I was on the next generation of political leaders, so if that's a sure sign that everything's going to go wrong, as far as I'm concerned. And then finally, and most importantly, I'm in the business, or I was until recently. So 15 years in the property industry, starting in central London, and this is my home territory. So until April, I was working in Camphor Cliffs and Sandbanks, specialising in the high-end market and new build developments, etc., etc. So for all the property developers in the room that think you're the most hated people around, I was an estate agent, now a politician. So it's just like I want people to hate me. So all I need now is to become a banker. But, well, I've been called similar, but that's right. So to start with, local government reorganisation. It's like this was planned because many of you will have heard about the idea of local government reorganisation in Dorset, in that taking the 9 councils that we've got and going down to two councils. And it seems to have been going on for a very long time because we put the bid into the Secretary of State back in February. The first time we were due to get the bid back, unfortunately the attacks happened on Westminster Bridge, so the decision was delayed. Then the snap general election, of which we must not talk, came. And then since then, obviously, it's been a slightly more difficult time in government. So it's been a long time coming. But yesterday, we finally got the minded to decision from the Secretary of State, Sajid Javid, saying he is minded to approve the bid that we put forward, which we called Future Dorset. Why are we looking at local government reorganisation? It all starts with the money, as always. So we've got probably across Dorset around £200 million that we're short over the next few years that we're going to need to look at saving. So as everything, it's driven by the money. But more importantly, I think having 9 councils across Dorset kind of seems a bit stupid, I think, when you speak to most people on the ground. Certainly the feedback we've got back from the consultation. So actually having 2 unitary authorities, and what unitary means is that they do everything. So rather than having, the county doing social care, and you have one unitary authority, which we are currently in Bournemouth and Poole, just handling pretty much everything from your roads up to your, social care and children's care as well. So that's why we looked at it to streamline, but also to think about the future. Everything's changing. We're a modern 21st century, and like anything, the public sector hasn't really kept up. I mean, anybody that's tried to report a missing bin or anything recently knows how difficult it's been. So really looking at that kind of digital infrastructure and building a 21st century council. So as I mentioned, the submission went in earlier on this year, and we've been progressing forward. It looks like we've now got a final decision, minded to decision from the Secretary of State, and that will be finalised probably in January, looking at setting up the new council from 18 months' time, so April 2019. So it's all happening really, really quick. But I'm an optimist, so it's all quite exciting as far as I'm concerned. Probably what's relevant here is how will it impact the property industry locally? Well, I think anybody that's dealt with planning or any form of compliance in the property industry knows it's not necessarily a fun game, and it doesn't necessarily happen very quickly. I think the idea that going to 2 councils, and the idea will be a unitary for the urban area, so one for Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, and then one for the rural area, means that A, there can be a focus on what is right for those areas, but more importantly, one planning body dealing with Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, rather than, no matter where you are, having to deal with different policies and different slants on where they're going. So that whole sense of bringing it all together, I think, will streamline things, and that goes from everything from the planning to enforcement to policy setting, all sorts of things. So I think it will give a much easier one-stop shop from an industry point of view in terms of that kind of bureaucracy level. The second point, I think, which is really positive, is that it enables us to focus a little bit more on the vision. So when you're looking at an area at the moment, you've got, we're in Poole at the moment, but half a mile that way we're in Bournemouth, and then we're in Christchurch, all of which have different political slants and different ideas about where they're going, and you get across the border from one and you're in a different vision. It just all seems a bit silly, so it enables us to have that one bigger, more joined up vision for our conurbation. And grant funding is super important. You'll have heard politicians locally going on about we've got no money, we've got no money. The reason is the way that councils have funded has fundamentally changed over the last 5-6 years. We used to, your local council does everything from social care to collecting your bins to fixing your potholes, used to be funded from a central government grant and your council tax. The central government grant has almost completely gone. And every year we are facing more and more new things that we're in control of. So we've got to think of new ways to actually fund these things. And a lot of it comes from grant funding from the government on a specific basis. So once you've got that economy of scale, you can start bidding for central government funding from infrastructure to everything. So it just streamlines the process. But I think more importantly, it's a really, really super opportunity for us to reset. This is not a merging of the councils. It's a brand new authority that will be invested from April 2019, and we can kind of start from scratch. So get rid of all the crap and bring it all new again. What could go wrong? So that's, and again, just making Dorset future-proof as well for the future, I think is. So there's the steps. We've gone through the business case, consultation, submission to Secretary of State. We got a DCLG vision decision yesterday, which is a minded to, further representations, and then finally through Parliament next year, and then the new councils from April 2019. It will give a whole new way of doing business in the property sector in Dorset, I believe. Hopefully for the better, both in terms of streamlining it and making sure that the vision for one place isn't too different from elsewhere. So it really gives us an opportunity to reset everything for the 21st century. So that's local government reorganisation in a nutshell, and a lot of work to be done over the next 18 months, not least for all the people that work in the public industry. And we've got a few of my colleagues here today, massive staff change as well. So it will be a worrying time, but we've got a nice vision on the horizon, and hopefully it will be a positive future. I thought I'd just touch a little bit on government policy. Conservative Party conference this year was a weird one. I've been to many conferences, but it's a really odd atmosphere in government at the moment because there's lots and lots of changes. Anybody that's ever been to any of these conferences, you always tend to find that there's a theme. And last year it was Brexit. So you go to all the fringe events and they just stick Brexit onto everything else. So, how are we dealing with potholes in light of Brexit? Everything is just kind of shoehorned into that agenda. This year it's all about housing. So it is all about how we're going to resolve housing for the future, how we're going to build more homes, how we're going to come to grips with it in terms of every different slant of the sector. So a huge, huge focus and a really big opportunity, I think, for the industry, because both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have realised that this is basically election winning and we need to get to grips with it. So time for bold change is the idea. Whether that happens or not is a different matter, but at least the focus is very much focused on our industry, which is really important. Locally, we're going through a local plan refresh in Bournemouth. The local plan is a kind of strategy, if you like, for building in the area. Throwing up some difficulties because it's just come at the time that the new white paper on building homes in the right places by government has come about, which will probably mean that Bournemouth, as an example, is mandated to build double the number of homes that we had in the past, which throws up challenges, opportunities potentially for the industry, difficulties about how we protect the green belt, opportunities for more urban areas. Are we going to have to go higher? What's the economies of scale going to be like? But a new ground that we've got to work through. Probably not a bad thing that it's coming along with the refresh of the local plan. Many of you will have seen calls for sites out there. So if you've got sites, bring them to us so that we can put them in to our plans for the future. But I think it's very clear that government has set the policy that certain areas are going to be mandated to build a lot more homes. There's a lot of talk about how they've come to those decisions. The new calculation for how many homes areas have got to make is based on a calculation involving house prices, which doesn't necessarily fit to where the demand is. So you have areas of the country that are suddenly told, you don't need to build homes anymore when they're really keen to build. Other areas that maybe have had really high house price growth because lots of London retirees have come down, which doesn't necessarily mean that they need the new homes for the young people, but it's something that we've got to work through. Some of you may be aware of leasehold reform that's been coming through. This is really in response to some bad practice in the industry. You'll have seen the news reports about some of the bigger house builders in particular having leases on houses and all of the problems that has thrown up. The good point about that is that the government is looking at tackling it, and they put a white paper for consultation to the industry. The bad thing is they've snuck a lot of things in there, so it's always worth, if you've got time for some bedtime reading, when the government comes out with consultation papers, bloody read them, because there are things in there that you wouldn't believe. So actually, some friends in the industry pointed out that within there they said, should we be looking at ground rents? Should we be scrapping ground rents altogether? We're minded to do so. And anybody that's in the industry, particularly developers, will understand that quite often ground rents are tied into your business plan. They're tied into your viability of the site. Quite often they're tied into pensions for your company, your projections of how much you're going to get if you sell it. So all sorts of difficulties. So sometimes there is a tendency for government to use a kind of sledgehammer to crack a nut, and we need to keep an eye on those things and feedback. I mentioned about the focus for housing for the young. This is the big thing for the future. So if you're planning anything in the industry, if you kind of dress it up as it helps housing for young people, you'll get a lot of support in it. So it's all about knowing which direction of travel things are going in. Infrastructure is a massive point as well that is coming through in government policy. We've got the Housing Infrastructure Fund that was announced at the party conference, which is a massive pile of money that central government are putting in for councils to enable residential development. So an example, Bournemouth has put in a bid, Poole has put in a bid, so there are areas of land that are hard to build on, but if we had £5 million to build a new road, we could do it. Government are giving out that funding. We're doing a lot of work in the Lansdowne about enabling possible residential there. So lots of grant money swirling around. So it's a very, very different time to be in local government as it was previously. And I just thought I'd talk about lobbying, because I think there's this myth that you can't talk to a politician about what your vested interests are, because doesn't that look bad? It's really, really useful. I mean, since I started in politics, and particularly since I've stepped up in terms of my role with the LGA and what I've been doing in Dorset, it helps that I've been in the industry, so I've got a lot of people that I know in the industry, so I've got a little bit of background knowledge, which is quite unusual for a politician. But a lot of people do lobby, and you can only really understand what the industry is thinking if you go out and talk to your elected officials, be it your MPs, your local politicians, people on various boards. The leasehold reform example, the ground rent, I wasn't aware of that until somebody in industry said, Phil, have you seen what they're trying to do with this? I was able to lobby national government, and it looks like they might be changing that. So if you know anybody in politics, if you know anybody that is in an influential role and you've got issues, talk to them, because you can't complain about what government is doing wrong unless you try and do something about it, is my view. So that's a little bit about government policy. Just what's happening in terms of property development and acquisition in Bournemouth and Dorset. There's a big push on property development from a kind of public level. So I think gone are the days where there is a requirement that councils only do this and private sector does that. The lines have been blurred. A lot of it has been down to the very, very low rates of borrowing that councils are able to utilise. But equally, the big revenue push that government has put upon local authorities. So we are now almost required to go out there and earn money, as well as just waiting for government to dish it out, which is really enabled particularly local government to become really super entrepreneurial and look at everything in the round in terms of, well, how can we do this to place shape, but at the same time kind of earn some money for ourselves as well. Bournemouth's been really innovative in that, so I'll just talk a little bit about the Bournemouth Development Company. We've got Duncan here from Bournemouth Development Company. That was a public-private partnership that Bournemouth set up a few years ago. The idea is Bournemouth Council has lots of land, lots of car parks and things like that. We don't necessarily have the in-house expertise to be able to develop. So setting up a public-private partnership so that you have the outside private expertise coming in, building and developing, the council putting in the land, sharing the profits. It's been a really, really innovative way that we set it up a few years ago, and has been copied throughout the country. And I'll go on a little bit to show you some of the work the Bournemouth Development Company has been doing. We've also set up a company called Seascape, and a few iterations of that, and my colleague Hugh will maybe talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Lots of different ways that councils are becoming more entrepreneurial and revenue creating. So we do a lot of building work. Why not set up a company that can go out and do building work and compete with the private sector? Some people might not be happy with that, but I think any competition is a good thing. But at the very least, it goes to stop having to make cuts. If we've got £500,000 black hole in the budget, we could either cut services or go out and earn the money in doing it. So all sorts of different ways that councils are doing that. We're actually looking at a hotel project in the grassy mound next to the BIC, funding that because we've got access to very favourable borrowing rates there as well. That's something we're exploring. And this all ties into what I said before about the vision. So in Bournemouth we have a town centre vision, which is an idea put it 10 years ago and maybe looking at refreshing it, about how do we want our town to look in the future? How can we facilitate that? Do we do stuff? Do we get private industry to do that? And it all feeds into the kind of the planning requirements so that you can really have a focus on looking 10, 20 years into the future rather than doing everything piecemeal. So it's a really exciting time. I also thought I'd just mention the asset investment strategy, which we're undertaking in Bournemouth, which is something I led on when I first joined. Every council around the country is doing it. You'll have seen the news reports about councils borrowing and investing predominantly in the commercial market. It's big business. I mean, councils, to give you an idea, can use Public Works Loans Board borrowing, prudential borrowing as we call it, which is about 2%, borrow over 50 years, and it's fixed. So we don't pay an increase in RPI, so as the years go on, it's more and more favourable. So lots of councils are on a relatively aggressive sometimes acquisition policy. Some are being a little bit adventurous and, buying, an airport site in Newcastle or something. Most of them, and certainly what we're doing in Bournemouth, is being very locally based. So what can we invest in locally in terms of acquisition, which is good for socio-economic reasons, but also brings in a return to council taxpayers. And we've already made a start in some of our acquisitions locally of some, really big commercial acquisitions that we've made, which are good for Bournemouth, they're in Bournemouth, and actually give us a really decent return. So what we're paying back over and above the borrowing goes straight into savings that we don't have to make elsewhere. The added advantage as well, I think, is that we've got to use this opportunity for the future. So I've got 3 kids, and I'm always thinking when we're making decisions, what am I doing for them in the future? The investment strategy, I think, is a really good example of what I would say is replenishing the freehold stock for the future. So in 30 years' time, 40 years' time, we own all this new land that we've invested in. I think governments of the future will go, well, that was a bloody good idea. So that's a plan anyway. So I just thought I'd just briefly, because I've probably overrun slightly, talk about some of the things that the Bournemouth Development Company is doing locally. You may recognise this as a citrus building. This is one of the first things that the BDC did, which is just in the Horseshoe Common area of Bournemouth. Old car park, relatively underused. We've got a policy in Bournemouth of no net loss of parking spaces. So whenever you see a development on a car park that a council, that certainly Bournemouth has done, it's been on the basis that we either re-provision the car parking on site or nearby. So this was a private residential offering with Turtle Bay underneath it, and building a new car park on Madeira Road, just a block away essentially, and was really, really popular and actually really useful for the town, because we started work on this when nobody else was building. So suddenly there were cranes in the sky. By the time it came to fruition, really, really good response on the resi market, and because of where it is as well, I think really sent out a message that Bournemouth is building, whereas other places weren't. So it's very, very useful when it came about. This is the Berry Court scheme, again in central Bournemouth. This is different because although developed by the BDC, it's a PRS offering. So anybody that knows PRS is private rented sector. Huge business, both in institutional investors and in local government. What you do is you build it, it's essentially build to rent. So you build it and they'll only be offered on the rental market. It generates a really, really good return, so you're essentially paying off your borrowing and at the same time generating a surplus, whilst at the same time dealing with actually the need that's on the ground, because in my view it's all very well building a luxury block of flats for first-time buyers. When first-time buyers are 35, 40, they don't necessarily want to be buying first-time buyer flats anymore. So actually a rented sector offering fills demand and also actually generates return for council taxpayers again. And again, this one you can't see, was an old car park, reprovisioned with a new multi-storey car park behind it. So you haven't lost the parking space, you've made the use of the site, and again, cranes in the sky is never a bad thing. And finally, the biggie, this is the Winter Gardens development, which is currently in planning. Anybody who knows Central Bournemouth, the Winter Gardens was the old concert hall, been a car park for a bit while we've tried to get this off the ground. I think this is really, really exciting. It's one of the biggest developments that Bournemouth has ever seen. To give you an idea, this is where the Hilton is here. That's the new cinema development. And I think it's really striking and it's a really landmark building. 4 buildings, a lot of retail and restaurant offering underneath. Crucially, great parking. So probably 350 to 400 flats, the same number of parking spaces, purely for the residential with a separate entrance, and then reprovisioning the current public parking with a separate entrance. So actually slightly more public parking than we've got at the moment, and also providing parking. And again, this is a part of the town centre vision, I think really sends a message that Bournemouth is out there and open for business and, you know, really exciting. And I think anybody that went into Bournemouth town centre 10 years ago, particularly at night, would probably have thought, okay, whereas now this is how we're shaping up for the future. So the public sector offers a really exciting enabling opportunity, both in terms of giving money for council taxpayers, but also placemaking. And I think from a private industry point of view, the more people are building, the more confidence you've got in the town, which I think overall actually is good for everybody. So that's my little whistle-top tour of being a politician in the modern age. And I think my colleague Hugh's on next, but happy to take any questions.
Yes. I'm just slightly puzzled why you're doing it now when you're about in 18 months going to merge Poole and Christchurch. Why would you not be doing no Poole one?
The local plan is, I think, 5 years old now, so you kind of have to do it over, it has to be a certain age from a kind of government policy point of view. And part of the reason that we're struggling with the new housing numbers that are potentially being imposed on us from national government is that our local plan is deemed to be out of date unless we get it in by a certain time. So A, we have to do it. B, I'm glad that we didn't put everything on hold in light of what LGR is throwing, because it's been delayed anyway, so you kind of have to do business as usual anyway. And until that decision is formally made, it is business as usual. So I think you're right to raise it, and you'll have a situation hopefully in 18 months' time where you have a brand new urban authority with 3 kind of semi-out-of-date local plans. But at the same time, you know, there are, we can't really do anything until that's in place, and then at that point, as well as redesigning the whole of the council, I think we'll have an opportunity to redesign housing policy across the foundation. Yeah.
You've spoken about amalgamation and new staff, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to actually teach your staff how to competently speak to customers on the telephone?
Definitely. No, yeah, of course. I think the problem is, if I'm being really honest, austerity has hurt local government. It's been necessary, I think, from a kind of country point of view, and the local government has felt the brunt of it. And so inevitably there's been staff have gone down because that's the way to live within your means. And local government's a really interesting one because we can't borrow in terms to meet our ongoing demand. We have to do a balanced budget each year. And I think partly the problem we've had with local government reorganisation is that we've seen that light on the horizon and we're kind of making do till then. But yeah, I think there's an expectation that offering an amazing customer service, be it a combination of digital or whatever, is certainly, as somebody that's an architect of it going forward, I would say is a priority. Yeah.
Thank you. As council, are going to be obviously very much involved with these new developments and these new projects that you're working on, will that give smaller businesses who provide the services to help make those buildings go up? Will you be working with them as well? So the local companies, will you be giving them the opportunities?
Yeah, completely. It's probably something I should have raised. I mean, Hugh will touch in a minute on what Bournemouth does in-house, but a lot of these are, particularly through the Bournemouth Development Company, really we are there to kind of enable it, and then we're not going to build it. And so actually bringing as many people in, of course, there's certainly economy of scale when you're doing it. Keeping it local, I think, is a real issue. I think Duncan would agree with me from a BDC point of view. When you look at the developments we've done recently, it's really good for jobs, because as you can keep people into work and use local kind of knowledge and workforce, again, it helps the economy. So I think it's a really good point, because people see cranes in the sky and they think, what's that? Oh, it's London buyers that are going to come and buy second homes. Well, maybe some of it, although the benefit when the council does it, we have more control over who buys them, which is what we did in the Citrus building. We were very, very keen on a certain type of people that are buying it, but also it's the impact that it has on the local economy. And I think you can't underestimate the power of Winter Gardens, which is 160, 170 million pound scheme that is going to keep a lot of the workforce in work for potentially the next 4 or 5 years. If that's it, thank you very much.
Actually, my first 2 slides overlap with Philip, so I'm going to skip over one of them. I like this one, which you've already seen, because it shows the Winter Gardens, which is a really exciting development, but it also shows the Hilton. And this is anecdotal information, but I have it on very good authority that it's true. So the story goes that 10 or so years ago, the investors behind the Hilton Hotel came to Bournemouth, and they saw all these tower cranes on the sky and thought, well, nobody's building, but something's happening in Bournemouth which could be quite exciting. And that was what got them thinking about maybe Bournemouth as a destination for the Hilton Hotel. And obviously, all of the jobs and the inward investment that's brought is good for all of us. So that's really essentially what BDC is about, which I take no credit for. Duncan is here, so you could talk to him. But it's about bringing investment into the town, which then benefits everybody. So there are lots of things going on at the council at the moment which are about that. So we've put in a bid to central government for £10 million worth of infrastructure funding around the Lansdowne. So this is the Lansdowne roundabout by Asda and the railway station, and then that corridor that runs all the way along the back at the top end of town. So if we're successful, and we're feeling pretty positive, what that means is this whole road network will be remodeled to create a number of significant development sites. Now these will be bigger sites than we would normally develop ourselves, which means they'll probably be available to the market. That means developers, contractors should see the benefit of that. Another funding scheme that we've bid for is called the Accelerated Construction Fund. This is specifically for housing sites, and we've bid for 4 sites. So this would be funding to bring them forward more quickly than they would normally. And in addition, we have 3 other regeneration sites, each one which could potentially take 100 houses. This one is the strip of land on Centenary Way, which is just north of the Sovereign Centre in Boscombe. So it's a very wide piece of road. It doesn't need to be that wide. It could be a lot narrower. So we're looking to remodel all of that again to create a development site that could potentially give us 100 more homes in Boscombe. And we're also working with the owners of the Sovereign Centre to look at a couple of sites on either side of that centre, which they would love to see developed. It will bring up the whole of that area. It's about bringing housing into Boscombe, and again, investment and jobs. So we also build our own council housing. One of the things I've heard about that, and also about BDC, is there's a sense that Bournemouth is a bit of a closed shop because we do a lot of our own development. But I'm really here to tell you that that's not the case. Almost all of our council housing is built by local contractors. And we hope to ramp that up. So we're building about 50 a year currently. We have been for about the last 10 years. We'd like to see that doubled and maybe tripled. And again, that's all good news if you're a local contractor. So that's council housing. We're also starting to build housing for sale. So this is a scheme in Boscombe, 11 homes for shared ownership. We also have schemes in the pipeline for market sale and also for private rent. And we're looking at all tenures, because I think what we've realised as a council is we need housing. We don't just need council housing or affordable housing or various different tenures. We need more housing across all tenure groups. So as a council, we're saying if you have sites that you want to develop for housing, come and talk to us. So Philip talked about the call for sites as part of the local plan process. That actually ends on Friday this week. So if you're a developer and you have a site that you would like to see designated for development within the local plan, I would encourage you to get on the phone and talk to our planning team, because that could be a real advantage for you. And from our point of view, we just want a register of all of the sites that might generate particularly housing, but also employment over the next sort of 5-10 years. Just on that, so again, this is something that Philip mentioned. The government have a formula for working out how many houses each town and city need. Ours used to be about 700-800, but the new formula says that Bournemouth needs 1,500 houses a year. And that's a huge pressure for us to be enabling that development. And obviously, if we're building 50 or 100 a year, that's a very small percentage of the overall housing growth that we're going to need as a town. So again, if you're a developer or a contractor, or if you have a site, or if you're in the property industry, we want to encourage you to bring forward those sites and to see those sites come to fruition. So a few of the other things that we do: we're buying properties for homeless accommodation. That's about getting people out of bed and breakfast, which is very expensive for the council, and into decent quality housing. But at the same time, we hope that we're encouraging the housing market along. So we also sell surplus sites. So this is land that belongs to the council that we don't need anymore for whatever reason. There's a long list of sites that might potentially become surplus, and we do bring them to the market from time to time. So if you're a developer and you're looking for sites, it's worth picking up the phone and talking to our property team, because you never know what they might have coming up to the market. We also have started recently buying commercial property. So that's about bringing in an income, as Philip said, to the council. I'll come back to that in a minute and talk about the Localism Act, which sounds very dry, but actually it has a real impact on what we're doing, and in a way that might affect you as well. And then the local plan, call for sites, we've already talked about that. So we also do some of our own building. This is a commercial building, so a restaurant that we built down on the seafront at Durley Chine. So it's leased to a commercial catering company, and it's right on the seafront. So it had to be built to a very high quality to survive in that kind of harsh environment, but also because we have a commercial restaurateur in there who demanded a high standard of finish. We won an award, not that we were looking for it particularly, but the building control officer said to us, "This is a really excellent quality building. You should put yourself in for an award." We weren't even really aware of those awards, but we filled in the paperwork and we won it. So that was a nice sort of accolade for the staff, but also sort of reinforced to us that we can actually build to a very high standard. We build for ourselves as well. So these are the overnight beach huts that you may have seen. They're in the national press, been incredibly popular. They were sold out. Actually, it was probably something to do with that article in the Telegraph, I think, but the phones ran off the hook after that weekend, and they were pretty much booked out for the rest of the year. So that was a real success. And we also won a national award through the Association of Public Service Excellence for our construction team, which brings me neatly on to Seascape, which is our commercial construction offer. So this dates back to 2011. The government brought in the Localism Act, which was effectively a deal with local authorities, which said, we're 4 years into austerity, we're going to cut your funding, but we'll also give you the ability to trade. So if you have quality services, you can trade those with the private sector, but you have to do it through a company because local authorities don't pay tax. If you trade through a company and make a profit, obviously then we'll get a share of that. So we set up Seascape 2 years ago. Been trading, this is our second year of trading. First year we did about $500,000 turnover, and this year we hope to be up to $1 million. So this isn't, it doesn't employ anybody as such. This is really just a brand which enables you to buy our services if that's what you want to do. So we do refurb, we do quite a bit of work in schools, and again our sort of selling point really is that we provide that robust, high quality at a reasonable price. And we can do new build too. And we also do building maintenance. So if you're looking for quality at a reasonable price, we'd love to talk to you about your next construction project. So that's it, very quick canter through, but hopefully a demonstration that there's lots going on in Bournemouth which you could engage with as property professionals or as developers or as contractors. There's a lot going on, and I think plenty of work to share out amongst everybody. Thank you very much. And very happy to take any questions if we've got time. Jeff, hello. If you have sites, then talk to the planning team, and if you're looking for sites, talk to the property services team. Yeah.
What's the infrastructure in place to pass planning permission on council schemes?
We have to apply to the planning team in the same way that everyone else does. So planning is a statutory function. They're legally separated from the council. I think there's a sense that we get an easy ride when we're applying for planning permission on our own sites. I can tell you that's absolutely not the case, and in fact one recently was refused. So there's a demonstration that we have to work to the same rules as everyone else.